Thanks everyone for coming here. My name is Shreyas Doshi. I'm a product manager working out of the Google offices in Mountain View. And I work on AdWords API as well as the AdWords interface, that is adwords.google.com. And so today I'm going to talk about the AdWords API V2009. And in terms of the agenda for today, I'm going to introduce you to V2009. We'll talk a little bit about features. I'll take you through some code samples to sort of, if you haven't looked at it, to show you the basics of V2009. And we have a session later in the day where we'll actually do a deep dive into the V2009 API and each of its services. And I'll also share a roadmap of what the next couple of quarters look like in terms of AdWords API. So with that, V2009 is the new version of the AdWords API. And the AdWords API essentially enables you to create automated, customized, real-time interactions with AdWords. So what does automated, customized, and real-time really mean? Well, automated means that you can do things at scale with the AdWords system, which hopefully results in cost savings for you. Customized means that you can write applications that meet your business needs and integrate that with the AdWords system. And real-time means that you can react faster to the changes that are constantly happening in your business and update the AdWords system about those changes. So taken all together, you have cost savings, meeting business needs, and reacting faster. What does that mean? Well, that actually means that you have happy bosses. So essentially, we here on the AdWords API team are in the business of ensuring that you are able to make your bosses happy, whoever they might be. And so if you have a feature request for us or a bug that you've been trying to get fixed, the best way to get it fixed is to tell me or anyone on the team that your boss is really unhappy about this, and we'll try to fix it as soon as possible. Now, so that's the AdWords API. Pretty much all of you have been using and hopefully loving the AdWords API for a long time. And recently, or maybe not so recently, about 6 months ago, we announced that we are launching the API V2009, and then in June we did an experimental beta launch, and in October we did a bigger launch. So in terms of what is V2009, the first key thing about V2009 is that it's an API that we've written at Google from the ground up. So we basically redid the entire AdWords API stack for V2009, and that's a big change from V13. And the reason we did that is that for us, that enables us to develop AdWords API features much quicker. So that's what it means for us. What does it mean for you? For you, it means that the API will have the same features as the UI does. And we've been hearing from a lot of you for the last 3 years or so that how come this feature is available in the UI, Google launched it like a year ago, but I cannot access it in the API. And it's really annoying because I have to do all these hacks in order to make my systems work. I have to use editor for the feature that's not available in the API, and I don't get reports for it, and it's just a mess. And then some of you actually told us, oh, it's making my boss really unhappy. So we took notice, and we said, okay, let's fix it. So this is a key point that I want to drive home, which is moving forward, we will actually be much quicker about ensuring that features end up in the API very soon after Google fully launches them. So to give you an example, if we launch, right now we're doing approximately quarterly releases. So I'll talk about the roadmap later on, but we expect to have another release of the API in Q1. In that release, you can expect to see a lot of the features that Google has launched in the past month or so. Now, one key thing about the API is that unlike the UI, we don't launch new features every 2, 3, 4 weeks. And that's, again, just to ensure that you guys can maintain, as developers, you guys can maintain your sanity. And so we are not like changing the API on you every 15 days. Although if that's something you would like us to do, then I'm happy to chat to figure out a way in which to do that. But in general, what we found is that you guys want new features, but at the same time you want stability because obviously developing your code and then deploying it to your production system takes time. And so right now we are doing quarterly releases. We may do less frequent releases depending on how many features we are going to launch. At the end of the day, if you find that Google launched a feature, you should expect the feature to be in the API in the order of a few months, which is when we might be launching the next version of the API. So V2009, other than the fact that you will be able to see the same features in the UI as you see in the API, it includes some new services plus services that you're used to. So there's campaign service plus campaign criterion service, ad group criterion service, ad group service, ad group ad service, several other services. The combination of that is essentially campaign management. So that enables you to do the things you do with AdWords, which is creating campaigns, managing your bids and whatnot. There's also a new targeting idea service in V2009, and that's essentially a replacement for the keyword tool service and the placement service, which you may have used in the version 13. And that's essentially to get ideas on keywords and placements. This is an example of what I was talking about earlier. So targeting idea service now will include ideas from the search-based keyword tool, which you may have used. So that's a relatively new feature which wasn't available in the V13, the older version of the API. But because of this re-architecture, we are able to bring this feature to you almost automatically as we launch the keyword idea service. What else is in V2009? Well, we have the asynchronous operations, also known as the bulk mutate job service. How many of you are familiar with asynchronous operations or have heard about it? Okay, so not many of you. For the non-developers in the room, asynchronous is basically asking for something and then having your code return immediately and having that operation being performed in the background, and then you can either poll or get called back on when the job is done. In the case of the AdWords API, you simply ask it for the status regularly. So the asynchronous service will also support partial failures. What that means is that let's say you submit a job with 50,000 operations and 5 of those have errors. Then what we'll try to do is ensure that as few of the operations that are part of sort of the faulty operations fail. And hopefully almost all the remaining ones will actually go through just fine. So that also provides you some cost savings as well. In addition, the asynchronous service is cheaper. So as an example, adding an ad, so creating an ad in version 13 of the API is 50 API units. When we announced V2009 way back when, we said it was going to be cheaper. So the synchronous ad operation, so to create an ad in a synchronous manner is 20% cheaper than in V13. It's 40 API units. What we'll do with the asynchronous operation, so if you're creating an ad with using the bulk mutate job service in an asynchronous manner, it's going to be 20 API units. So essentially, all async calls are going to be 50% cheaper. And again, we think this is really important. One, because this will enable you to accrue a lot of cost savings in terms of your API use and will enable you to do much more with the API. That's one. The second is that asynchronous operations are also easier on our resources, which is why we are able to reduce the cost significantly. So we do want to give you a great incentive to use the asynchronous operations. We think that that's the way to go so that it's easier on your systems, it's easier on our systems. And we've put a lot of hard work behind this service. And we'd definitely like to see you use the service and accrue the cost advantages. Now, note that the change for the cost of the asynchronous service, where it will be 50% of the cost of the corresponding synchronous service, is going to go effect in December. It's not in effect right now. So if you use V2009 right now, the asynchronous service will cost the same as the synchronous, and we'll change that next month. Another feature that we launched in V2009 is the location extensions preview. And this is another example of something Google announced a few months ago, and we are able to actually provide it to you in the API right away in the latest version of the API. And the reason I say it's a preview version is because it doesn't have the local business center synchronization feature, which we will be adding in Q1. But you can create addresses and have those addresses, have those addresses show up in Google search results. And obviously, this is local is a big priority for many of you, and this we think is a very compelling feature, which you do have access to in the API. So we talked about the features of V2009, what it is. V2009 is also employs a different programming style. So what do we mean by that? So essentially, you need to remember two things: get and mutate. You use get calls to read stuff, and you use mutate calls to add, remove, or set. Set is update things in the system. So those are the two key things that you need to remember. Now let's look at get. When you look at get, you essentially need to remember selector. So essentially, get you can use get calls by creating a selector object, and here is an example of how to do that in order to retrieve ads. So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm creating an ad group ad selector, and we'll talk about ad group ads later. And then I'm basically adding, setting ad group IDs. And in the last line of code, I'm actually fetching the ads associated with the ad group IDs. So I created a selector. I created a selector object, and then I'm using the get call, passing to it the selector object in order to retrieve the associated ads. There's also the mutate operation. And so in that, you need to remember the word operation. So get is selector, mutate is operation. And here is an example of mutate. So over here, what I'm doing is I'm adding an ad group. So initially, I'm creating an ad group object. I am setting its campaign ID, setting the name and whatnot, few operations like that. Then I'm actually creating an operation object. I'm saying set operator equals operator.add. So what I'm saying, an operation has two components, an operator and an operand, or a set of operands. So here I'm saying the operator is add, and the operand is the ad group that I want to add. And in the last line of code, I call the mutate service, and then to it, I pass an array of operations. In this case, there's just one operation, but I could actually pass multiple operations over here. So we think V2009 is easier to program, but because it's a big change, you need to get used to it. And so once you sort of get used to it, you see the pattern, the get, mutate, the selector, and the operations. It's actually quite easy to program. So when I say it's easy, how easy is it? Well, so to prove to our team, the AdWords team, I basically said that V2009 is so easy, even a PM, that's me, can do it. And so there's a set of commercials. I don't know if they air them over here, but there's a set of commercials about this insurance company, which it says, Geico, it's so easy, even a caveman can do it. So I don't think it's as easy for a caveman to be able to do it, but it's definitely easy enough that a PM like me can actually use V2009. And so to prove it, I decided to create a completely useless app. And what I decided to do is to take my Twitter status and then create an ad out of it. And so the idea being that if somebody searches for my name, which about, according to Google, about 2 people do that every month, and one of them is my mom. So I found the other one. Thank you. Thank you. So about 2 people do that. So when those 2 people do it, they would see my Twitter status, which may be interesting. So anyway, this is what it looks like. So last night, I updated my status saying I'm in Zurich. to talk about V2009, and then when I searched for my name after a few minutes, I saw an ad. And it shows how many tweets I have and whatnot. So how did I make this happen? How did a PM start writing V2009 code? So let's take a look. And I won't go through all the code, but I'll go through some of the key parts of the code. So the first thing is I used the AdWords API Java client library. I would highly recommend, if you're not already using one of our client libraries, to absolutely use them because it's significantly easier that way. I'll talk a little bit about the client libraries later as well. So let's get the Twitter part of the code out of the way so we don't have to think about it. This is exactly the code I used to get my Twitter status and get the number of followers on Twitter. And I used the Twitter for Java library to do this. Now, before we get into the AdWords API specifics, one key thing to remember is there's the notion of an ad group ad that you'll see in the AdWords API. And essentially, that's a way to tie, that's how I think about it. It's a way to tie ad groups and ads together. Ads reside within ad groups, of course. And we use the ad group ad object to tie them together. And there is also a corresponding ad group ad service, which enables me to perform the get and mutate operations on that object. So in order to initialize things, I created an AdWords user. Now notice how easy it is. When I created an AdWords user, essentially I successfully created a connection with the AdWords API system. And because I'm using the client library, it was just one line of code. In this case, it actually retrieves the developer token, the application token, the username, password of the client, all that information from the adwords.properties file in my home directory. But even if you wanted to access different accounts, you can use a different variant of the AdWords user constructor to do that. Then I retrieved a handle to the AdWords ad group ad service. And again, it's pretty simple. All I do is I take the user, the connection object, and then invoke a get service on it. Over here, I've specified V2009, which is the last version of the V2009 API that we've launched. Then I create the text ad. So this is very straightforward. All the substring stuff you'd see is just because Twitter statuses can be 140 characters, which may violate the AdWords ad limits. So I had to truncate my status, and so this is how I truncate the status. But again, it's pretty simple. What I do is I say, I want to create a new text ad. I set the headline and set the corresponding other lines, the destination URL and the display URL, and I'm done. So now I've created a text ad. That's what. And I've also invoked I also have a handle to the ad group ad service. Next, I need to set up the ad group ad. So remember this picture. And notice what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm creating a new ad group ad object and adding the text ad I created in the last step to it. Okay, so I'm setting its ad, I'm saying good ad group ad dot set ad equals good ad. So that's what I'm doing there. And then I'm associating the ad group ad with the right ad group. So I know within my account which ad group I want this to go in. So I'm setting the right ad group ID, and then I set the status to enable because I want this to show. So that's how I link an ad to an ad group using the ad group ad object. And then finally, I just perform the add operation. So again, because this is an add operation, it is changing something, I would use mutate. And I would create an ad group add operation. I mentioned that the operand is the ad group ad that I just created, and the operator is adding that particular ad group ad. And then I just, the result object stores the result of the muted call. Again, over here, I'm just passing one operation in the array, but I could pass more operations if necessary. Now, it's a best practice, obviously, that once you actually invoke this call, you should inspect the results of the call to ensure that it actually went through. Now, because it was a hack, I did not bother to do that, but I could actually iterate through the result object to determine which of my operations succeeded and failed. And so that's pretty much it. Combining this code together, I'm actually able to please the 2 people that a month that are searching for my name on Google, and hopefully one of them will click on the ad and drive up my click-through rate. So V2009. So now we saw a code sample. Now, are there any other features that are interesting? So obviously the answer is yes. And so let's take a step back and look at the ad I had created. In that ad, I had certain numbers. Now, this doesn't work quite well because what if somebody starts following me? And I'm sure after this talk, all of you are going to go to Twitter and start following me. So my follower count is going to jump through the roof. But this count doesn't change right now. And same for the number of tweets that I have. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to make my ad compelling to users. And the way to do that is to make it look fresh, make it look like it's showing recent content. And so I'd like to be able to update these values. Now, obviously, I can do that by just updating an ad, which would basically delete the existing ad and create a new one. That's how it works. But then, so I want to make changes to restricted parts of the creative, which is only those numbers. But I might also want to do that for other things. If I'm selling goods, I might want to do that for price, for inventory information. Price is especially interesting if you're selling something and you show the price in the creative. What we found is that sort of pre-qualifies users for you. So only users who are really genuinely interested in your product at the price that you are specifying in the ad will actually click on the ad. And so hopefully that will drive up conversion rates due to that. So if I want to do these kinds of things, and essentially it boils down to if I want to react faster to the changes that are happening in my business, I can do that via the sort of update operation, but I will lose my ad history and statistics because it will, like I said earlier, it will delete the existing ad and create a new one. And also it could subject me to ad approvals process. And so if you want to avoid that, what we can do is you can use ad parameters. Some of you already know about this feature. You may have heard of it as creative parameters or live ads. But essentially what we're calling it now is ad parameters. And it's a feature of the API. It's a small feature. And it's coming out of beta in V2009. So it's small, but we think it's powerful. And we think it's going to be interesting because it really sort of extracts the key value of the API, which is essentially enabling you to act in an automated way much faster as changes are happening in your systems. And so here's how I would specify the headline. In this case, I would say followers, and then I use 2 things, param1, so parameter 1 and parameter 2. I specify a default value in there. And then at runtime, I can change the values of param1 and param2, and I do that at the keyword level. So I can say that I want the value for param1 for the keyword Shreyas to be 400, and then it shows that my followers are 400. Some key things to remember about ad params, that they're numeric only. Currency symbols are okay, so you can use currency symbols to provide price information. But other than that, you need to have numbers. You can have a maximum of 2 parameters. And we don't yet support all international numeric formats, but we support some of the common ones that you see there. And this is actually an API-only feature right now. So I think you guys are all used to having UI-only features or editor-only features. This is actually one of the few exceptions where it's an API-only feature. One, because it's essentially a feature where it has to be automated, and UIs by definition are not automated. So API was the first place where it absolutely made sense. And depending on demand, we will look at supporting this feature in the web front end and editor. We don't quite know what it means for us to support ad parameters in the UI, but we'll definitely be looking forward to your feedback as you start using this particular feature. Now, so we looked at some of the key features of V2009. Let's talk a little bit about dates, because I'm sure you're all wondering what's coming up next and whatnot. So to take a step back, on October 22nd, last month, we launched V2009, which contains all the wonderful features that I've been talking about. Essentially, V2009 contains everything V13 does, all the supported V13 functionality. V13, again, is the older version of the API, except 3 services. So that's the traffic estimator service, account service, and report service. So these 3 services are not yet available in V2009. And we also announced in October that all services except those 3 that I mentioned will be turned off in 6 months. Our normal sunset period is 4 months. V2009, we think, is a substantial enough change that we decided to extend the sunset period to 6 months. What that means is that these services will be turned off on April 22nd, 2010. So as you get back to your computers, please add this to your calendar. I would say, add like 3 entries to your calendar 1 to 3 months before this date, because we'd definitely like to ensure that you're able to upgrade your systems to V2009 before these dates. This is what our roadmap looks like for the next few quarters, most of you do some form of software development or the other. Future launch dates are always tentative. Even a day before launch, they're tentative, so just keep that in mind. But we plan on launching another version of the API of the sort of V2009 series, which will now next year be 2010 series. We'll be launching that in Q1, and that will contain the missing functionality. So report service, which I know is very important for many of you, will be launching in that release. We actually, for report service, we actually considered doing an experimental version of the report service earlier, sort of to give you a preview, but we decided against it because we felt like you had enough already on your plate with, having to redo your campaign service and the targeting idea service and whatnot. But we will be launching a full-fledged version of the report service in Q1. Traffic estimator service will be there as well. And account service, we are not quite sure. I mean, there's some level of project risk associated with it, but we think we'll be able to make that as well in Q1. It will also, the Q1 release will also contain new features. So again, gets back to, okay, when do I get new features in the API? Because that's really important for me. So it will contain new features like the bid simulator. You will notice that bid simulator actually doesn't exist in V2009. That was an example of something that was just too close. We could almost make it, but not quite, so we decided to just launch it in a proper way in the next release. But that, again, we think is a very powerful feature. For those of you who are not familiar with bid simulator, it essentially shows me possible projections of my impressions and clicks and the cost based on how much I'm bidding on a keyword. So if I decrease the bid, how will that affect my impressions and clicks, or if I increase it, how does that affect these metrics? So that's coming up. Full support for location extensions is coming up, and a few other interesting features that the AdWords team is working on right now. When we launch the V2010-02 release, we will also start the sunset clock of 4 months on the other services, so the report service, traffic estimator service, and the account service. Obviously, because the exact date isn't clear yet, we don't quite know when that sunset phase 2 will be, but we think the V13 sunset phase 2 will be sometime in Q3. So again, I want to really emphasize this point. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to begin working with V2009 right away. I do think that it's better to start playing with it earlier and ensuring that it sort of meets your needs and also giving us feedback on where you were disappointed. The earlier the feedback we get, the better it is, obviously. We think that you're going to like it because it's cheaper as well as we think, obviously, it's better than the old version of the API. So one question you might have is, well, you have V2009, but it doesn't have all the features. So how does it work? What do I do to use the report service? So what we are saying is that you can use it simultaneously. And it's actually easier if you use the client library. So you can use V13 and V2009 simultaneously. Use V13 for report service, for account service, and traffic estimator service. Start using V2009 for all the rest. Which brings me to my next key point, which is use the client libraries. I alluded to that earlier, and I think it's really important. Our team has spent a lot of time building really robust client libraries, and they're available in various languages. So you'll notice that a few languages are not in here, like C++ is not in here. Does anyone use C++ for AdWords API? Hands? No. Erlang? No. COBOL? Okay. So we don't have, the client libraries in many languages, but we do have them in the most popular ones. If you don't see something here and would like to see, let us know. And the key things the client libraries do is they abstract away SOAP. So I like SOAP, but I don't want to deal with it all the time. And so what the client libraries do is, and you saw that in the example, the code example, that I didn't have to deal with SOAP at all. It abstracted all of that away. And it also, the client libraries make your code stable over the long term. So we might be making minor tweaks to the SOAP API over time. But our client libraries, in many cases, will abstract that stuff away. So your code doesn't have to change. It keeps things more stable. So I talked about a lot in the last few minutes. And so just doing a quick recap. V2009 is the new version of the AdWords API. It essentially enables you to get new AdWords features sooner than you are used to. Campaign management is in V2009 right now. It's usually 90% of what most people do with the API. Asynchronous provides you efficiency and economy via 50% cost savings over the corresponding synchronous services. Targeting idea service provides you with better ideas and lets you know where you're missing traffic. Ad parameters enable you to react faster and hopefully improve your ROI. V2009 has everything that V13 does except 3 services. And majority of the features that are missing and additional new features are coming up in Q1. And our key call to action to you is to start upgrading to V2009 right now, if you haven't already. This is the date again, April 22nd, 2010. And to wrap things up, we think these are exciting times. A lot of big changes happening with the AdWords API. And it's sort of an opportunity to take a step back and ask yourself 2 questions. One is, what new features should I be using which I haven't been using to make my business better or my client's business better? And the second is how you can take advantage of the cost savings that V2009 provides to you. If you have any problems, need help, we have plenty of resources. We have code.google.com and an AdWords API section on that. There's extensive documentation there. There's also a Discover V2009 blog post series that we've started. I highly encourage you to check out the AdWords API blog for the Discover V2009 series, and you'll see really in-depth articles on the new features that we've launched in the API. And as always, there's the AdWords API forum where you can ask questions from our team or other users on if you're running into problems. And if you have feedback, we are definitely listening. That's my email address. I personally promise to review every single email that's related to feedback about V2009 and reply to it. And because I'm making this public promise, you know that I will be following up on it. So absolutely feel free to send me email. And I will also direct it to the rest of our team so that we ensure that we are actually looking at your feedback and reacting to it. And so that's all I had for you today. Now I guess we have some time for questions.